Okay, now, so welcome to my video on walking through the basics once again, hopefully. So, if you've looked at my channel, you will have seen me struggling to work through some exercises I would consider very basic on my level. And I've spent a few years because I hit a bottleneck. I spent a few years trying to understand basic points, really trying to dig into what was going on, how to think about chess. And this is the result so far. So I'll share with you my thoughts and hopefully it'll be helpful for you. So, as far as I can see, basics are what the advanced ideas are built on, right? Basically, all advanced ideas are combinations of basic ones. And naturally, if your basic ideas are not solid, then any advanced ideas you have will be a unique combination of those basic ideas and their problems, right? The problems you have if you don't completely understand those basic ideas really well. And that'll be a combination of the problems as well as the strengths of your understanding of basic ideas, and often amplified. So the weaknesses in your understanding, in your practical application, will be amplified. So what I want you to do is take some time, don't rush it, but I want you to walk me through basics. So I will ask some guiding questions. I want you to pause, get something to write on, write down your ideas, and then I'll present my own. And hopefully that will be helpful. So, my first point is, I assume you know how the pieces move and capture. Can you explain it for me? Pause. Write down your thoughts and come back. Okay, I'll start on what I have to say. Now, partly credit to Coach Roberts, although it was something I did have in mind before, is that pieces have fields. They're like a generator, and each piece has its unique type of field. The king has this type of field, the pawn has this type of field. Let me change the color. Queen has its own field, etc. What I wanted to point out is that these fields are not just movement fields, they're fields of control. It's very important that we are able to learn to intuitively find these fields. We need to be able to visualize these fields. For instance, we're often told that the knight is a horse, right? It jumps in and out. Well, it's kind of more like an octopus, right? The knight doesn't just control one square. It controls, if it's in the middle of the board, it controls 8 squares. We have to remember it moves backwards. We need to visualize this accurately. Otherwise, we limit our vision to only the one move and not the full range of movement. Same with the bishops. Oops, doesn't do that. We need to be able to visualize their, like with these long pieces, we need to visualize their beams. With the queen, tends to actually have a color complex, right? Now it can change color complexes, unlike the bishop, but it does have a temporary color complex. So I'll move on to the second point I want to talk about, and that is what happens if I line up, say, a bishop and something else. It's black to me. How do I do this? So I'll just do this for a moment, and this. So the bishop is lined up with this. Let's just imagine it's a black piece for a moment. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't think. What I want you to do is stop, think about it, and write down your impression. What happens when pieces line up with other pieces? Okay, I will carry on. So what I wanted to emphasize here was sightlines. How sightlines open and close. See how here the bishop cannot look through the knight. It's limited by the sightline. But as the pieces move, sightlines open up. It's very important we're able to visualize this. It's something that often gets missed. Another thing that's worth being aware of is how pieces block the movement of other pieces. It's not just a sight line, it's also that when this piece is in front and blocks the piece, it doesn't just prevent it from attacking those squares. It also prevents it from moving those squares and controlling other squares. So sightlines, yeah, they're something I wanted to emphasize. One more thing in this section, I want to ask, what happens if I move a piece? For example, this one, the knife. Wait, I have to move something first. Okay. So, sorry I didn't ask you to pause. Not very well organised here. So what I want to emphasise is the guarding and unguarding, the field movements. As pieces move, their fields change. So, if I move the queen diagonally one, now it's still on this diagonal, but now it has a new diagonal here. It has a new rank and a new file, so its field has changed. It also, let's now move to e5. also null regarding some pieces it has been before. I'm just clicking randomly after clicking on the knife. It's not helpful. The other thing I wanted to mention is sometimes the piece itself, when moved, becomes unguarded, right? This is, I like to differentiate between pieces that are loose, so it is not guarded, but it is also not attacked, and pieces that are both unguarded and attacked. I would call that a hanging piece. What is going on here? Sorry. That is what I would call a hanging piece rather than a loose piece now. And the last point I wanted to make, and this will all come together. So, the last thing I wanted to point out is, say I want to swap the queen for the pawn, or the rook for the queen. How do I know if it's a good trade, right? What makes this worth more or less, or is it not? So pause, think about it, try and explain. Okay, I'll give my thoughts. So the value of the pieces is basically based on how useful they are, right? And there is some variance in what's useful when, but generally speaking, a faster piece, a piece that can, well, that's a bit confusing way of saying it, right? But like a piece like a queen can travel right across the board at once, whereas a piece like the king or the knight, or a pawn travel a lot slower. They take a bit of time to cross the board. A faster piece is generally worth more because it controls, like it can move around a lot quicker. That means it's much easier to control large spaces of the board. The same with the queen. It has both the field of a rook and that of a bishop. So it is a lot more valuable. Also, it can switch between color complexes. So we say the queen's worth a lot. The king is obviously worth a lot because it's a win condition. But when we're comparing stuff like bishops and knights, it gets a bit more complicated because bishops are very fast, but they're stuck on their color complex. So half of the board you literally cannot get to, whereas knights are a bit slower, but they can get to both colors. They can also, they're also not blockable by other pieces, right? Unless there's a piece of your own on the square you're trying to move to, they're a bit more difficult to, they're a bit better in block positions than bishops. But the point here is that we need to be aware of and understand not just the values, right? I'm familiar with the point systems, but they don't really help us to understand very well what the functional value of the piece is. It just is kind of an approximation. The other aspects to piece values, of course, is when we're going into a trade. Sometimes a piece of lower value, lower objective value, right, a pawn is not as valuable as a queen, generally speaking, but because of that, we don't want to trade the pawn for the queen. So the pawn ends up pushing the queen around, even though the queen is more like a, in quotes, stronger piece, because we cannot afford to trade them. Long term, we'll lose out. And so there's complications around that. But this is something we need to be aware of, and we need to sort of understand a bit better and have an intuitive feeling for it to get better at chess. So, that's good. That's all I wanted to talk about, the pieces. And the reason I wanted to talk about that, let's pull this together a little bit, is because of what we call visualization. So, when we play a game, we want to think about what will happen, or what has happened when we move a piece, right? What's changed about the position? What did it do? How did it change the position? What did it what were the positive effects of the move we made in helping us try to win? And also, what were the negative effects it made in helping us try to win? Because you have an opponent that's also trying to win, and yeah, there are often negative effects in every move we make, as well as positive effects. So we need to think about and be aware of both, and that is a very, very important part of what we call visualization. We need to learn to intuitively understand this, so we can think about other things, so we can spend our brain power and time planning what we're trying to do. So let's get into looking at more practical game type stuff. So what I want to ask is basic question. How do I actually win a game? Right? So pause the video, go and think about, write out what thoughts you have on winning games. And with that. So what I want to talk about here is checkmate conditions, right? It's the win condition of a checkmate. So, king and rook versus king, very simple, basic checkmating stuff, but people struggle with it. And why do they struggle with it? Well, the basic condition of checkmating is just quickly let black cooperate with his checkmate. They're not cooperating anymore, whatever. There we go. The basic condition to get a checkmate is the king needs to be trapped. He needs to have no escape squares. It needs to have a checking line. There needs to be something checking the king. And the checking piece needs to, the checking line needs to not be blocked by something. We talked about sightlines earlier. If you can block the sightline of the piece to the king, that prevents a checkmate. And also the checking piece needs to not be able to be captured, right? Or at least needs to end up with a piece there that is checking and not suddenly being captured. So these are the three conditions of a checkmate. The king needs to be trapped, there needs to be a checking line that isn't blocked, and the piece needs to be not hanging. Right? It can be loose, because it doesn't matter if it's not offended, as long it doesn't matter as long as as long as it's not able to be taken, as long as it's not hanging, as we say. So that's the sort of checkmate pattern, a checkmate pattern with a rook. But we need to familiarize ourselves with all sorts of checkmating patterns, right? The very basic ones. Let me demonstrate another set of pieces we could try to checkmate with. Now, you can actually checkmate with bishop and knight. It's a tad complicated, and it doesn't come up very often. So normally we don't teach this at beginner level. There is a very helpful video by I can't remember his name now. Let me quickly look it up. Daniel Mereditsky. There's a great video by him on how bishop and knight checkmates work. But the point is that we need to understand how these pieces can trap the king in order to win, right? You can get down to these pieces, but if you don't know how to trap the king and with the checking line, and a piece on there, because you can have the checking line, but if black, it's your opponent to move, and they don't have any squares, and that's stalemate, and that's draw. But we need to understand those, and this is what checkmate motifs are about. They're about helping us to learn and remember the patterns. It's similar with tactic motifs. They're about helping us to learn and remember the patterns where pieces that are functionally loose or hanging. Loose is what I say a piece is not guarded, or hanging is a piece that, say, is not guarded as many times as an attack. These pieces can be won, so that they're patterns to, in gaining advantage that way. So that's that point covered. The last point I wanted to ask is very simple, the question that any beginner wants to ask. Perhaps they can't articulate it, but it's something that is really basic to our understanding of chess. So, my question is this. So you're new to chess, you see the chessboard and you say, well, how should I start a game? We start with equal stuff. So what are my goals to play for an advantage? Right? How do I get an advantage? We've got exactly equal stuff. It looks pretty like, what on earth do I do? So what am I looking for? So pause, think about it, write some ideas down if you have any. This is kind of a tough one if you're not familiar with it. But it's good to think about this. So I'll take a few seconds, pause the video, and we'll start again. So, the points I wanted to focus on here are some of what we tend to talk about as basic development rules, right? When we make a move, we look to control the center. That's the middle of the board, these four squares. Now, why do we try to control the center? Well, it's about controlling space. And this space is where we are able to control lots of the board from. And if we can deny it, and it's not just about us as well, right? If we can deny it from our opponent, it means they tend to be rather cramped, trapped. Their pieces can be isolated on one side of the board or other. They're less functional if they are cramped by our control of the center. And vice versa, if we have control of the center, then we are more likely to have highly functional pieces because they have sort of tentacles that reach into all areas of the position. Another part of it, so that's really space control. That's kind of what I'm talking about there. And it sort of flows into my other point. As we bring pieces out, so the first one was central control. As we bring pieces out, we want our pieces to be active, what we call active. We want them to have options. We don't want them to be stuck in a corner, locked in, not doing anything. That's not a very active rook. We want them to be out, doing stuff. But it's not just about being active, right? We want this knight can come in here, do stuff. This is bad opening line. But if it just goes out on a journey by itself, it's not really doing much, right? You just exchange your knight for a pawn, and what did you do? Well, you just took a bad exchange. So what we want is for our pieces to work together. We call this coordination. Bring a piece out, let's just make a move. And ideally we want our pieces to be on squares where they work together to a goal. Because two pieces are a lot more effective at overloading your opponent's defences than just one on its own. Or well, two pieces generally you need more, right? So we want piece activity, and we want them to coordinate. We want them to work together. And this is principles of development, right? We want our pieces out. We want them to work together. And we want our king to be safe. Because if our king isn't safe, then our opponent's space control, pieces working together, can target it. And sometimes they can gain use of it, they can trap it. We want to keep our king safe. So often the way we do that is to tuck it to one side with castle. Let me just make a silly move, and we tuck it to one side, because not always, but often it's safer in a corner than in the middle. But the underlying idea is that we want to keep our king safe. And so slightly more I guess there's other sort of general points in this topic is that these ideas, space control, piece activity and coordination, and king safety, these ideas lead to ideas about weak points, points that aren't very well guarded, like these f2 and f7 squares are innate weak points. Undefended pieces and promotion ideas, they're often they're kind of the key points of what we're looking for to gain an advantage. So let me go back and summarize, right? What are we looking for? We're looking for central control, because we want space control. We want piece activity. We want pieces to not be blocked in and not doing anything. We want them to coordinate. They can be active but not coordinated, and that generally doesn't work out very well. And we want to keep our king safe. These, if we're successful in this, lead to ideas about attacking weak points. Often if our opponent has cramps, they end up with undefended pieces because they're overloaded. And sometimes we have promotion ideas, right? If the pawn can get to the other side of the board, it can promote to another piece. And that can sometimes turn out to be important. So these are the ideas we're having for playing for an advantage. And they're very general ideas, but they apply to most of our chess. So that's my thoughts on walking through basics. It's been a little bit convoluted. I haven't expressed it very clearly. It seemed a lot clearer when I was writing it. And I still think it is a lot clearer when I was writing it. I just struggle to express it in a good way. But hopefully that's been somewhat helpful.